Thank you. So, one of the questions that I spend a lot of time talking to people about is, well, who's making money doing this yet? How are we doing this? What's the business model? What are, if we're not reimbursable, are we going to make it? And what if we don't get that? And anyway, lots and lots of questions get thrown my way as if I know anything. But what I promise to do is to bring you the people that know a lot. And we're really privileged. Our next session is a keynote called Breakthrough Business Models in Digital Health. And Wainwright Fishburn is a partner at Cooley LLP, and he is going to be doing this, and I think it's going to be really, really enlightening. And to be honest with you, we probably wish we had maybe about at least 30 minutes to an hour to hear this one. So I was told to open his motto right before, so, Jill rocks.
Let's hear it for this girl. Thank you very much, Jill, and it's a pleasure to be here. So, my name is Wayne Fishburn, and I come to this conversation as the chair of the Cooley Digital Health effort, and also I was the founder 20 years ago of the Cooley office in San Diego. Those of you who heard me talk, you would ask me to pull my mic up. Okay, those of you who have heard me talk elsewhere have probably heard this story because I love it. We opened the office in San Diego about 20 years ago with the IPO of Qualcomm. And at that time, Qualcomm was a relatively straightforward satellite truck tracking company. The reason I talk about that is that as I come to this conversation, and 2014 is a lot about predictions and where we're going from here in digital health, I like to use that 20-year time span as really the framework that frames a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the last few days, particularly as it gets down to what the breakthrough business models might actually be. So if you take Qualcomm from IPO to today, last I looked, they're always in and around $100 billion market valuation. So how do you look and say what are the projects today, what are the companies today that have any hope of reaching that kind of a level? I know a lot of us would be happy with $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion, but what the heck. But I think you also have to really credit Qualcomm for being one of the leaders in building the ecosystem as they've gone out and really played their role in seeding the ecosystem of digital health. So from that perspective, let me tell you a little bit more, there we go, about my own personal background and how I come to this conversation. So one of my first, I guess my early roots were really in the biotech sector, and Cooley is really a firm that focuses dominantly on the high-growth, new economy sector of new businesses. And the early activities that brought me to this was really the crossroads of the life science industry and what Qualcomm was doing back in the early days when we helped spin LifeCom. That was one of the first commercial efforts to really put some of these products into practice. That led me to working on the WLSA board, which has been really initially almost a walled garden where it was a very closed meeting. It was hosted, and they have now opened it to broader format. But one of the other things that WLSA has done is they have become one of the thought leaders, holding a meeting every October on the campus back of NIH that is really the academic thought leaders in wireless health. So there's two dimensions if you can think of. One is the very commercial dimension. The other is the more forward-looking academic perspective. I've also been on the board and was the immediate past chair of the Sanford Burnham Institute. And that's about a $150 million basic research institute focused initially as one of the approved cancer centers in the country, but is now broadened to cover basic research across a whole range of activities. The reason that I mentioned Sanford Burnham is they're a great example of an organization that today is doing a lot of the integrative thinking that I think is fundamental to this conversation that we're about to have on where the breakthrough business models are, in that they're saying how can we take our basic research and move it directly into the clinic. And it is the patient in the hospital that has been mentioned as the lab animal of the 21st century because of all the things that are happening in genomic medicine and the like. So the person who followed me as chair of Sanford Burnham is Greg Lucier, the chairman of Life Technologies, and it was 2 years ago that Greg was here giving a keynote as they introduced the first sequence machine, the Proton, that was aiming toward the true $1,000 genome. Similarly, on the board of Sanford Burnham is Pat Garrity, who was just identified as the #1 business leader of the year in Florida, as the leader of the Blue Cross effort in Florida, and has been phenomenally forward-thinking in the way that he has approached a lot of these questions. So that really just goes to the core of what I think is happening in this room and happening today, which is the integrative thinking. So when you distill that down, what we're going to talk about a little bit is how it plays into the world of digital health. Okay, so this next, probably, I promise you, not more than 60 to 90 seconds, it might be a minute and a half to 2 minutes, you can measure, is aimed at those of you who actually learn something when you get on an airplane and they give you the pre-flight instruction that tell you how to fasten a seatbelt, okay? So this is the basic, what we all know about healthcare costs, what we all know that underpins the conversation, but in many communities that are just learning about digital health, they don't see the way these points tie together in the same ways that we all do. So just very quickly, there's obviously the facts around cost. The inevitability that 20% of the general GDP currently is consumed by healthcare, and that's quickly moving to be 40% by 2050 if we don't do something. The next, and I do this just because I like to show the second slide, is the aging population. We're all well aware of that, but the aging population is really going to be a big driver of where things are going to be moving. Regulatory. One of the things that's unique about this particular industry is what I will call the public-private partnership. One of the other boards that I had put up in that first slide that I've been involved with that has taught me a lot about this is an organization called CPATH. It's a group that is a public-private enterprise that was founded or brought to being by Janet Woodcock, the former FDA commissioner, who said, we are just really having a challenging time as we're seeing all of these biomarkers come onto the market, and we don't have any real standards as to how to get them through quickly, get them approved, and so on. So through a combination of industry, and there's about 13 to 15 pharmaceutical companies that are organized through this CPATH effort that are sharing their preclinical data. Pharmaceutical companies never before had shared that kind of data, but it was all toward the common collective of moving all products through, and they saw the benefit. I think that's a lot of what's happening in this area as well, and as we see the Affordable Care Act and other governmental initiatives really begin to take root and push a lot of the things that are happening today. So this slide just very quickly talks about the relationship between payer, patient, provider. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I think it has been covered well throughout the last handful of sessions. So let me go forward now and really talk about my main purpose, which is what is the state of investment in digital health and where are we going to be going? Well, the first point I would make is that the amount of investment going into this sector is unprecedented. We have now seen almost $2 billion go in 2013. There were more than 180 companies that raised $2 million or more in 2013. But what's more interesting to me is that the 2012 class that raised Series A venture financing, there was 180 of those companies that also raised Series B and C financing in 2013. And what we're also identifying is a much broader group of venture capitalists are investing in the sector. There were 27 VC firms of one description or another that basically were investing in this sector last year and that invested in 3 or more deals, as contrasted to roughly 2 to 3 of the similar firms that invested in more than 3 deals in the year before. So the leading VCs in the area include Qualcomm, Social Plus Capital, also Norwest, Cardinal, Khosla Ventures, Merck, among others. And what you're seeing on the company side is you're seeing a lot bigger financings. So, for example, Practice Fusion, Proteus, which has been mentioned, and Fitbit all raised anywhere from $40 to $70 million in a single round. So sort of expansion capital, if you will. The couple of observations that I'd make, and it really, again, frames the conversation, is that in order for those companies under typical venture returns to deliver a satisfying result to the investor community, we need to create approaching $15 billion worth of value by 2019. And so I think that really is the framework from which I look at this whole conversation. So let's talk a little bit about the venture community and what it means. It's taken a while, I think, for the venture community to really understand this sector, because if you look historically, there was a bifurcation within the investment community. There were the classic life science investors, the kinds of people that put money in Amgen, Genentech, the early biotech therapeutics, drug delivery systems, and so on. And there was a deep set of expertise around biotech investing. Then you had also what I'll call the digital community, that was social media, that was Facebook, that was Google, and many of the predecessors. And there was not a lot of cross-pollination or familiarity with the healthcare sector as an application and sort of digital platforms, mobile platforms, as sort of a driving technology. So what I think we've seen is the investment community has become much more sophisticated as they have moved through this this new dimension. And I think the real discussion in and around the venture halls is the $2 billion investment level last year something that's likely to remain, or is it something that is the beginning of a bubble? I think if you live and believe and watch what's happening in this conference over the last few days, I think you will see that there are many incredible breakthrough opportunities that are likely to yield results, and that is, I think, of course, the promise. So just to put a few names up for you, what you can see here is how it segments. $150 million raised by the likes of Proteus, Castlight, and ZocDoc. Now, why that's interesting is if I think back on what it takes to get a biotech drug, an Amgen or a Genentech, those are the kinds of investment dollars that have gone into those kinds of companies. If you look at the middle group, 100 to 150 million, that similarly is a very substantial amount of venture investment. So companies like Practice Fusion, Patient Safe, 23andMe, it was alluded to yesterday, some of the challenges that the 23andMe in particular is facing as they try and be bold with their vision, but do it in the context of an uncertain group of regulators. But nonetheless, those are the companies that are attracting the capital. And look at the far left, $50 to $100 million, again, by any measure in the venture business, that is a huge amount of capital that's been deployed. And you can see that there's a nice subset of companies in that group as well. One of the observations, and I think it's one of the major points of this conference, is that you have CES for the first time has 10%, and this has been mentioned before, 10% of the companies on the floor are healthcare related in one dimension or another. And that is absolutely unprecedented. So it really underscores what we've talked about so much, which is the consumerism that is driving so much of what the digital health promise is all about. And if you begin to think about where that movement is going, in my mind, it in some ways helps you understand why these large dollars are needing to be invested. Because when you're trying to approach and get the attention of a consumer-based group, it essentially requires substantial deployment of capital. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about how the industry has built upon itself and how the early actions around the companies were around just simply mobilizing. It was sensors, it was devices, it was accessories, it was wearables. The next step in the evolution is you begin to think about how to invest in these companies and where things are moving. It's how you organize the data warehouse, getting more sophisticated in your dashboards, looking at the way in which you present reports and you communicate not only with your consumer, but the people that are the constituents of the consumer, be it the healthcare provider, the family, and so on and so forth. The next generation that I think we're really just upon today is beginning to get insights from these first two platforms, and that really goes to all the conversation around big data. I was talking to Ewan Thompson at Khosla Ventures, who is responsible for a large part of their digital health investment, and Khosla is one of the major groups investing in this sector. And one of the things that he and Vinod really spent a lot of time thinking about is the big data aspects of the investments that they've made. And one of the things that they do is they look at the ways that the companies together can think in a common manner about the big data and the big data analytics. And then, of course, the final step that we've yet to fully realize, although I've got something I'm going to show you here momentarily that talks a little bit about it, is the move toward behavior change. So, from the venture perspective, again, most of this is well known to this audience, but for people who are somewhat new to the area, the investment community likes to think about things really in silos, if you will, and then they look at the cross-connectivity. So the 6 key verticals that help me really kind of very simplistically think about how the companies would be organized, it's the wellness and fitness, chronic disease, transitional care, aging in place, clinical trials, and telemedicine. So let's talk first a little bit about the fitness and wellness. To me, the most important aspect of this part of digital health is it's blowing a lot of people away as to its impact. So if you think about it, the first-to-market product, Fitbit, is now being sold in 20,000 stores. There has become a social activity that is connected to your connected device. That has translated into a very, very strong consumer demand. And as we're just coming off the Christmas season and the holidays, I like to say that it was easy to gift. And an example that happened in my own family, and it surprised me, my sister and brother-in-law gave my two kids each a Fitbit for Christmas. Completely surprised all of us. The kids opened the packages and were very excited about it. I'd been carrying around the new Misfit Shine, and this is the first time that they were opening that. And it was just a very typical example of how this is becoming mainstream and consumer-driven. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to tie the link between that fact and what I think it's going to have to do with the healthcare story. I think it's doing two things. I think you're first seeing people getting accustomed to wearing something and having a feedback loop. I have to say, when I used to put my Fitbit Shine on, or my Misfit Shine, on my iPhone, and I would watch it reverberate, and then it would give me a quick report. Even, in my own circumstance, where I'm a relatively active person, it changed my behavior, and I would go out and do one extra thing if I was seeing that I wasn't meeting the marks that I'd set for myself. So where that goes is that as you start to see the healthcare environment, and particularly the patients, having more and more access to their own data, they will already have become accustomed to it in and through the use of these devices. The other thing that I think is important is the smartphone is really becoming known as your personal cloud or your personal hub. And if you think of what that means from a healthcare perspective, if you imagine the day in the not-too-distant future where all of your healthcare data is seamless, and we've been talking about it, the Humetrics example is a fabulous example of seeing how the healthcare data can be aggregated in a single, easy, user-friendly spot. But if you begin to think of the day that you've got all of that data, all of your doctor's visits, all of your meds, and so on and so forth in a single place, and then that is able to transfer with you as easily as you can change cell phones, that's when you begin to see the impact of this industry, again, from a consumer-driven perspective. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're clearly seeing the need that's being established. From the chronic disease perspective, we've talked a lot about that. The whole notion is, are we going to be moving to prevention? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but we can look at the companies that are in that environment. So aging in place is another one. So I'm going to see if you'll do something fun with me here. I'm going to conjure an image for you. I'm going to say one word, and the first person who is on their feet, both feet on the ground, with their hand up in the air, and yells the associated word I'm looking for, I will do a special open tab with Jill for margaritas at an interesting, digital health event in the future. Okay. All right. So let me set the stage. We're in what I would call an elder person's cave, and you have the slippers, you have the rocker, you have the bed nearby. Okay. I'm going to give you the word. 3, 2, 1. Grandma. Got to get up. Feet. Come on. Grandma. TV. How many people hey, all right. How many people can imagine grandma, grandpa at home without their TV? Well, you take what's happening in the senior market, and you're getting a combination of existing technologies, seniors who are open to technology. Something like 60% of seniors have smartphones, and another 15% or so have tablets. And so you look at a company like Independa that worked with LG, and it's the first, and they're putting into the elder facilities the first healthcare embedded TV that is basically a friend of the elderly person. So it's something that is so easy, so obvious, but it's really what's going to be changing the state of the world here. So this is where you think of from a venture perspective, how big is that market? That market's about $20 billion, so that begins to get some attention. Some of the other things that we like to talk about is transitional care. This is another place where the public-private partnership has come into place, and there's a lot been talked about in terms of moving the readmission rate lower. And we all know of the conversation yesterday about meaningful use and the like has talked to us about how these arenas are very focused on how you can solve this major healthcare cost center. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is this statistic from CMS has shown that the readmission rate is actually dropping over the last couple of years. And I would posit that that really is a function of having a lot of focus on this particular problem, and we'll see where it goes from here. So the last point that I would talk about is clinical trials. There's a lot of energy being put into clinical trials. My personal belief, and I won't slam anybody that's made investments, but it's hard for me to see billion-dollar companies coming out of this, but I can see very successful companies in terms of automating and really using digital tools to get into the clinical trial area. And telemedicine, I love the comment yesterday about the cluster in telemedicine, and we all look forward to the day that it's maybe a little more elegant, if you will. So let me now go to my predictions. First, I'd like to set the stage, and let me go back here a second. Set the stage, and really what I think two things are going to be very, very important as we think about the foundation for this predictability. The first, and I think the Continua conversation was very important of that, a very important aspect of that, is the interoperability of the things that are being done in this sector is fundamentally very, very critical to making this a success. And so if we have not learned anything from EMR, I would like to think that supporting efforts like Continua so that you can get all of the industry thinking more collaboratively, thinking more coordinated, that's one of the things that's going to be critically important. The other thing that I like to say is I'd like to see digital health elevate the role of the doctor. I think there has been far too much conversation of late about how you can replace the doctor, how the doctor's not necessary, and so on and so forth. And my view is I'd love to continue to see the best and the brightest moving into med school, but we have the devices such as the Humetrics tool, where you sit down with your doctor, it's a calm, relaxed, reflective conversation. You're getting the absolute best of what that person has to offer, but that the doctor becomes much more central, because if we're going to have any chance of curing the doctor shortage that we're talking about, we've got to make this a continued, very attractive profession. So I'm hoping that that becomes one of the things that comes out of this. So now let's talk about what's happened with the companies. I'm not going to give you my own prediction on this one, but there was a survey that Nina Gelson and others at InterWest Partners did. It was done middle of last year, and they said, what will be the big breakthrough companies from the current population? And the winners of that inquiry were Practice Fusion, ZocDoc, Airstrip, and Castlight. But what's interesting, and this is sort of the entrepreneurial perspective versus the investor perspective, when it was analyzed, 23% of the investors, 23% of the entrepreneurs, no, the other way around, 23% of the investors and 5% of the entrepreneurs doubt that there will be a single standout company in 5 years. So glass half full, glass half empty. So in closing, I would like to give you my top three of where I think the near-term really changes, momentous changes are going to come. In one is more near-term, one is more middle-term, and one is more long-term. So the more near-term, and I keep talking about Humetrics, but I just think it's such an elegant example of this public-private partnership where you have something that you can open today, you can show it to your grandmother, you can show it to your doctor, you can show it to any of the people that you're responsible for, and it begins to give you a vision of where we're going into the future. So I think having that kind of data accessible to the consumer is in the near term. The medium term is what I think is coming out of IMS, and this is very, very important, is we are, for the first time, having digital apps as prescribable. And the app script model, which is something that is being talked about in that environment, is a fundamental breakthrough. And one of the great examples of a prescribable electronic app is WellDoc, where they have a handheld-based application for diabetes management. And then my favorite, number one, is as follows, that humans do not have built-in diagnostics. And I credit and thank Eric Topol for letting me use this slide. A car has 400 onboard sensors. Your iPhone has 10 plus onboard sensors and 4 radios. The human has 0 onboard sensors and an annual checkup, maybe. So I'm working on a project right now that's a crossover with some of the great nanotechnology that's taking place at Caltech and some other great folks that are working in the biomarker area. And I'd like to predict that onboard implanted biomarkers that are always on, always reporting, and part of this whole new vision will be what we're looking back 20 years from now and enjoying. So with that, thank you, Joe.